All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get going. My name's Simon Gutierrez. I'm on the communications team with Pacific Power, based out of Portland. Came out here last year and had a slightly smaller crowd, so good to see more people in attendance. I see a couple of elected officials out there as well and some public safety partners, so we thank you for coming out and being part of this conversation as well. We're here today to talk about our wildfire mitigation efforts. That's a fancy way of saying what the company is doing to protect against the risk of wildfire, specifically related to our equipment and our communities. So this is a number one priority for Pacific Power. We've invested millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 5 years, and we've committed to investing about $2 billion more across our 6-state service territory over the next several years. So it's a big deal for the company. It's important to us. And we're here to kind of share a high-level overview of the things that we're doing as a company on the ground to do this, to protect our communities, to guard against the start of wildfires. We do that in a couple areas with situational awareness, with grid hardening, and some other techniques that we use to ensure that the safety of our communities, which is a top priority for us. So with me here today, we've got, oh, I think we have some pictures. Hang on. These people. We've got, here with me tonight is Megan Buckner. She's in our operations department. She's our wildfire delivery program manager, I think. Yeah. It's a tough title. Mine's easier. It's just communications. Next to her is Nora Yatsov. She's our Director of Emergency Management. So she's going to talk a little bit about what you can do at home to prepare for the eventuality of a potential power outage, or also some of the programs that we have to assist folks in our community during power outages. We've got some generator rebate programs. We've also got some things that you can do to make sure you get all the proper notifications and things like that if you do experience an outage. And actually, first, not last, is going to be Chester Lampkin. He's one of our meteorologists. He's going to talk about our advanced weather modeling and forecasting abilities. We've got several meteorologists permanently on staff, and they are looking at the weather and fire conditions 24/7, all the way through fire season and beyond, really. I mean, they're also looking at winter weather, but obviously we need them definitely during fire season when we're trying to get ahead of potentially dangerous weather. So that's a white slide. That wasn't expected. Okay.
We are living in a world.
Oh, here we go. That's why it happened. Hold on. So before we get to all that, we're going to show a quick video that kind of spells out what we're doing and some common terms, and just gives you a couple examples of some of the wildfire mitigation efforts that we're involved in. And the video hopefully will tee up the rest of the conversation. We'll have a short presentation by each of our speakers after that, and they'll tell you about their respective departments and give you a little more details about the nitty-gritty and the on-the-ground efforts. But we'll start with the video here. No, we won't.
We are living in a world where there is more extreme weather, and wildfire risk continues to escalate. Here at Pacific Corp, we are making the investments necessary to protect the public and to protect the infrastructure and to protect the people of this company as well.
While the wildfire risk has been increasing here in the West, the investments that PacifiCorp has made has risen right along with it. To date, we've already spent over $500 million in wildfire mitigation, and the current forecast for deploying the system hardening that's involved in the wildfire mitigation plan reaches into the billions over the next 8-10 years. It becomes important to understand, well, where do we prioritize those investments? And so we want to make sure we're targeting that large investment where it's going to make the most impact, where it's going to reduce that fire risk the most.
We have an expansive weather station network here at Pacific Corp. By the end of 2023, in Pacific Power, we had nearly 300 weather stations. And in Rocky Mountain Power, we had nearly 200 weather stations. They're there because we're collecting important meteorological data that we're going to feed into our local weather forecast models. Temperature, wind, moisture levels, wind gusts. These hundreds of weather stations give us better data so that we can make better decisions on how to mitigate fire risk and how to protect the system from extreme weather events.
So by establishing an internal meteorology team, they're able to run these risk models with our own weather station network to help identify that risk no matter where and no matter when across our entire service territory throughout the year.
We have amazing, really cutting-edge technology. We have a computer model that covers more than 1 million square miles. It forecasts weather for every single point across that entire region. we have access to two types of modeling. We have the short-term modeling and the long-term modeling.
With both that long-term and short-term view, we're able to identify where the fire risk is, and by identifying that, we can then decide what mitigations to deploy.
We've taken 30 years of historical data and we use that to identify areas of potential risk so that we can mitigate as much as we can ahead of potential wildfires in the future.
By looking back at that data, we understand that when the conditions are at their driest and when the wind is at its windiest, that top 5%, when those two things come together, that's where 98% of the catastrophic fires have occurred. When those conditions are present, we want to, for safety reasons, de-energize the lines and let those conditions pass. And so we deploy that when we know that the conditions are escalating, but they're nowhere near that top 5%. And so we give ourselves a little bit of a safety buffer, say a 15% dryness, 15% windiness, to make sure that we're making a good balanced decision between the risk and the outages that are created through the mitigation steps of de-energizing.
I'm optimistic because I know that we are doing the work necessary to keep the public safe and to protect the infrastructure of the utility.
As that risk has increased, our response has increased as well to match it and do everything possible to reduce that risk of fire in the areas we serve.
The end of the video. All right, that should kick off our next topic, which is situational awareness. And you saw him in the video, but Chester's going to talk about that from a meteorology perspective. Chester, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Simon. All right. How's everyone doing tonight? Good? I've never had a bad meal in Pendleton. Never had a bad meal in Pendleton, especially at this place. I had the elk burger at lunch. It was so good. Anyway, so I just want to say thank you all for coming out and engaging with us. We really appreciate it. We have a slightly bigger crowd than when we were here last fall, and I'm glad to see it. We're going to talk a little bit about meteorology and how that fits into the picture of mitigating the risk of wildfire across the Pacific Power system. And it starts with this slide here, the situational awareness. So real quick rundown. I've been in meteorology for almost 20 years. I did 19 in television and media. I've worked all over the country, Texas, Missouri, Washington, D.C. I'm really glad to be out here in Oregon now. And I've been working in the utility space only for about 7 months now. So like you all, I was once just a customer, just a utility customer. I had no idea how any of this worked, what went into how a power system worked, and how they are every day watching potential risk. Here in the Western United States, we have a big risk. It's wildfires. So my job as a meteorologist at Pacific Power is to know when that risk is at its greatest. We're one of the first utilities to invest in advanced weather forecasting and research. We have a team of in-house meteorologists. There are 5 of us on the team, 3 based in Portland, the other 2 based in Salt Lake City, but we all work together as one team. And for us, it starts with situational awareness. What is that? You've probably heard that in many different facets of the world that we live in. For meteorology, for us here at the utility, situational awareness is all about knowing what the weather is doing now and how it can impact the electrical system that feeds your homes. So that is what is most important to us, knowing what data is out there. We're collecting all this data from all those weather stations we mentioned. We're looking at fire data, we're looking at weather data, we're looking at computer modeling, we're looking at everyday stuff that even you may be looking at. You all know your weather in your neighborhood, your town. You've lived in those places for a long time. You recognize patterns. That's what we do as meteorologists. We do pattern recognition to forecast the weather, being aware of what is going on today and how it impacts the electrical system. So we take different kinds of actions to reduce the risk of wildfire. Again, it's all about what's happening now, today, and what's coming soon, that short-term fire risk. In a few minutes, we'll hear from Megan. She's going to talk about how we reduce long-term fire risk, that long-term look ahead to how we can protect the system. But we're going to talk about what we can do in the short term in the meteorology department. So starts with
daily risk weather forecasting. Weather that we have right now, today, everywhere. So everywhere that we provide power, we are forecasting the weather. That includes everybody in this room, the entire area here, Pendleton, out to Enterprise, up to Hermiston, out to Arlington, into Walla Walla. We cover all those areas, so we're weather forecasting for all those areas. Again, there's a team of 5 on the team. We're actually going to be 6 soon. We also have a data scientist who helps us parse out data and kind of look at patterns and see how, he actually gives us a check on how we're doing on the weather. Are we forecasting the wind correctly? Are we under forecasting this or over forecasting this potential impact to the system? We make a weather forecast 5 days out, and we focus on that transmission and distribution lines. The transmission, the big ones that go from the power source into our distribution network. Those big power lines out there, you see them right along the Columbia River, right along 84. You see them all over the place. And then the distribution systems, that's the stuff that feeds your home, feeds your apartment, feeds this building. Okay, so if we're your power company, essentially we're watching the weather in your neighborhood. That's what it comes down to. In the winter, we focus, of course, on storms, freezing temperatures. In the winter storms, of course. In the summertime, late spring, summertime, right now we're getting into it. It's fire season. That's our main concern. The high winds, hot, dry weather. Those are the conditions that we are most concerned about for potentially high-risk fire days in which fire can spark and can spread quickly. So we talked about in the video, how are we watching the weather? We've got all these weather stations across our distribution network. We have access to National Weather Service weather stations. We have access to RAWs, different types of weather stations, all the ODOT stations, all tied into our computer network. So we're watching and monitoring that information. The stuff that you guys see on your phone or your weather report you watch on the TV station or wherever you get your weather from, temperature, wind, humidity, that sort of thing. But we're also looking at other things that dictate those high fire weather days. We've got weather data tied to every single distribution circuit in our service area, so that gives us an idea of how the system is impacted by windy days or hot days or extreme cold, whatever it may be. So everybody's tied to a weather station somewhere in our network that we are watching the weather. Okay, so you can see the map here. State of Oregon, those are all our different service areas, and we've got weather stations all over the place here. All the information is available free to the public on PacificPowerWeather.com. We've got all our weather stations listed up there, and we also have some of our in-house weather data available there at PacificPowerWeather.com. We've got a map here of some of the weather stations that is tied into our system. Most of these are ODOT or FAA, local airport, et cetera. But we also have utility stations across other parts of Oregon and in neighboring Washington as well. These weather stations, they feed us data every 10 minutes, temperature, humidity, winds. We're always concerned about wind. Wind, I would say, is the #1 enemy to power providers. That's what causes outages, causes trees to fall on the lines. It causes lines to slap. It helps, unfortunately, it helps spark fire as well. We're also watching the humidity, the moisture levels in both live and dead vegetation. You're probably wondering, for those who aren't that familiar with fire weather, why do we care about the moisture in dead vegetation? Well, actually, it's very important because the dead vegetation, or what we call the carryover fuels from last year, the grass from last year, it's still out there, right? That helps spread fires. And that is a big concern for us. And then if you go into the forest areas, there's a lot of dead vegetation up there. Limbs, trees that have fallen onto the forest floor. That stuff is fuel for fires. So we need to know the moisture of that stuff as well. So we're always watching all these different types of data and kind of trying to paint a picture of the fire risk and the fire danger. And again, it's all on the website there. We also partner with different organizations, different utilities, because we're all in this risk together. It is something that we are all battling against, that wildfire risk. It's not just a utility problem, it's a community problem. So we work with partners, local emergency managements. We work with local governments, state government, federal government, the National Interagency Fire Center, NOAA, the National Weather Service. I just came from the National Weather Service office here in Pendleton. I wanted to get in their face and talk to them so that they know what we're worried about and they can give us information on what they're worried about and see how we can work together. Because
this is a community problem. Like I said, this is something that everybody is impacted by. Okay, so I want to get to some of the nitty gritty. We've got the risk modeling, that short-term risk modeling that we're talking about, our computer modeling. How does it work? We've got our own in-house computer model that we run twice a day. It goes out 96 hours. It's a high-resolution model, 2-kilometer model, as we call it in meteorology. So just a little bit over a mile in grid spacing, and it covers the entire western United States, more than 1 million square miles. And this computer model, we've run it backwards in time, 30 years, to get an idea of what the weather did 30 years ago, and then we compare it going forward. So we have a benchmark, so we can say, this is a top windy or top dry or top hot or cold day. We are using the past to look at our forecast in the future as well, to be able to look back and say, this is a really high-risk day. And that's when we know we need to put our power system into sensitive settings, or we need alert emergency management of the possibility of extra power outages. We talk to operations and say, operations, hey, we're worried about this part of Pendleton, or worried about this part of Enterprise, we're worried about this location for potential extreme weather that could have impacts on the system. They'll stage patrolmen and linemen out there in order to get ahead of the potential outages. We had that happen with the ice storm in the Willamette Valley. We had folks staged out there ahead of time because we knew that the ice storm was going to be so bad. And that's what we're doing with our weather modeling or computer modeling. It's an in-house model. It runs out 96 hours. Looks at historical data, but we use it for our 5-day forecasts. We're able to identify those strong, or what I want to say, the high potential fire days, the highest risk days, using that data. And we compare that data, again, to the past. And it helps us predict extreme conditions, impacts on our power lines, and how we can prevent wildfire ignitions and quick spreading wildfires. I want to show you a video here. So here's the video. This is the start of it. We're going to go back to just last year, by the way, okay? So not that long ago, August 2023. It's when I started at Pacific Power. And this is the Smith River Complex. It made some headlines. It was the biggest fire in California last year. Why is this relevant to us? Well, first off, Pacific Power serves this area, had a direct impact on our customers there. So this is what was happening there. This is the wind forecast that day, the days leading up to that fire. Not much wind, thankfully. It wasn't a wind-driven fire. That wasn't the problem. What was the problem? Well, I'll show you in the next part of the video. This is our in-house computer model, that WRF. This is the lightning forecast. Look at all that lightning that came up in Southern Oregon, Northern California. That fire in Northern California, which did spread into parts of Oregon, was ignited by lightning. It was a lightning-started fire. So we had to use our computer data to say, hey, we're going to have to put these areas in a higher risk because we're concerned about lightning starts. There were thousands of lightning strikes out of that storm system. Hardly any rain. It was a dry lightning pattern, which happens. It happens in the West, right? This is not unusual. This is not new. But that's all it took, was just that one day to spark the biggest fire of the year. We also have access to a computer model. It is a wildfire modeling, and it actually will model wildfires and their behavior, which is really cutting-edge technology. It's from Wildfire Enterprise Analyst. This is something that's developed in the private sector. So a lot of utilities are using this. The national, some of the government agencies are starting to use it as well, but we're one of the first to use this Wildfire Analyst. Now, why were we modeling that fire? Well, see that purple there? That's our transmission lines. That fire was forecast to go through our transmission lines. And in fact, it did. Had major impacts to thousands of our customers there in Northern California. So very impactful stuff, and we're doing this science in real time, right? Now, I do want to point out this is a model. It's not going to be perfect, okay? So this science, meteorology, a lot of people don't realize it, or maybe you do. It's an imperfect science, right? And fire modeling is also imperfect. But it is still useful information. It gives us an idea of how we can respond and get ahead of the problem. This is also from that same software, that Wildfire Enterprise Analyst, and this was used in order to, this part here is used in order to see where the highest fire danger is. So you don't really need to know the technical aspects of this, but yellow and orange is indicative of higher, what we call energy release component. That means if a fire started, there's a lot of energy, higher chance of ignition. And that's what this was showing the days leading up to that Smith River complex. And finally, it'll move on to the next thing I want to show you guys. Again, the PacificPowerWeather.com. It's the last thing I'm going to talk about. Again, freely available information on our website. It has wind, temperature, humidity, and you can parse it out to different parts of Oregon or wherever you're interested in. You can even divide it up to just utility-owned weather stations. In case you're kind of a data nerd, you want to see information. It's all freely available. We tell everybody about it, PacificPowerWeather.com. You can check out the winds there. And this is the data that we use in order to decide where we're going to put sensitive settings on our system and the potential of public safety power shutoffs. You'll hear more about that from Nora in a few minutes and what that means. And what's really cool about this data is that you can kind of divide it up by wind, temperature, all sorts of things. We're coming up on the on nearly 1 year anniversary of the Hat Rock fire. So, you know, it's just kind of a reminder that there's fire danger out here. There's fire history. And that's the other thing. The fire history tells a story. If we've had fires here in the last 20, 30, 40 years, there's a good chance that there could be fire again. So that's our top job in meteorology, is to prevent that from happening. That's what we are doing. We're on duty 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. We've got on call. So we're here watching the weather for you all. With that said, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to toss it over to Megan Buckner. She is, again, the head of our wildfire mitigation program, and she's going to talk more about that long-term risk and how we are protecting the system with some of the stuff that her and her team and our operations team are doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Chester. Wow, it's tough to follow the weatherman. Yeah, so my name is Megan Buckner. I am the Director of Wildfire Mitigation Program Delivery at Pacific Corp. I'm super happy to be back here in Pendleton. I see some familiar faces, so I'm getting to know the community, which I'm really happy about, and understanding more about the area and the risks that are and the concerns that are out here. My title is a mouthful, but basically what it is I'm going to be talking to you about the different tools or the different programs that Pacific Power has in its toolbox to address some of the wildfire risks that Chester was just talking about. And just like Chester said, this is a community problem, right? And so I encourage you all to reach out to your public safety partners, reach out to your emergency management departments to learn more about what everybody else in the community is doing as well. The programs I'll be speaking to today are just going to be the utility program, so what the utility is doing in the areas. Generally speaking, too, the tools in the toolbox, I'll be talking about like kind of two sets, if you will. One will be your sort of system hardening, your resiliency, like making the system more resilient to trees and things like that. And then the second set of programs or toolboxes, tools in the toolbox I'll be talking to, are going to be more of the operational practices, things like that, how we can operate the system differently. And I do want to note that at Pacific Power, our wildfire mitigation plans are recognized as some of the forefront in wildfire mitigation. There was a Sanford study that recently listed the Pacific Power wildfire mitigation plan as one of the highest ranking based on the programs that we're going to be sharing and walking you through today. So first I want to start off with a map of the Pendleton area and kind of speak to some of that long-term risk analysis that Chester introduced a little bit, right? So long-term risk analysis is what Pacific Power uses to develop what we call the fire high consequence areas. You can see a little bit of purple over here in the fire high consequence area. And basically what this long-term risk analysis does is it looks at things like fuel and terrain difficulty to evaluate, okay, should there be a spark in this area? You know, it's in the middle of the woods, it's dry, it would be very bad, right? This is the sort of risk methodology that's used to prioritize work like grid hardening and system resiliency that I'm going to give a lot more detail and some cool graphics in a little bit. Additionally, in the Pendleton area, I did want to mention there's approximately 200 line miles of distribution and approximately 100 line miles of transmission lines in the area. So this is our Pacific Power Service territory in blue. So first, talking about system hardening, right? So how are we making the system more resilient to limbs falling on it and things like that? We start with covered conductor and undergrounding in a program that's called Line Rebuild. So we go in and we look at, okay, let's look at this segment of line. Let's see what we're going to rebuild it with. Should we rebuild it with covered conductor, where we replace bare conductor with a more insulated material? There's an example actually there in the back. Underneath the right equipment, there's covered conductor example back there if you guys want to take a look. Now, when we go in and we do this sort of line rebuild project with covered conductor, it can be more heavy. And so the engineering design can also require things like replacing poles. And so where there are pole replacements, there's a priority to replace with more fire resilient materials. So you'll see things like steel poles, fiberglass poles, those sort of things going in instead of wood. Additionally, you'll see a different design, potentially with aerial spacers to keep your wires from hitting each other, or wire-to-wire contact causing an outage and switching and ignitions and things like that. An alternative to covered conductor can be undergrounding in select situations and in select environments, right, where the option is to go undergrounding with the line instead of covered conductor. Another option for system hardening can be upgrading the equipment itself. So making the reclosers or the items that switch the power on and off, make them work faster, so there's less arcing, less ignition risk there, and also make them faster and communicating as well. So adding some SCADA on and things like that. And you'll see in a little bit of video about how the settings on these reclosers work. But if you're like, Megan, what does a recloser do? If you've ever felt your lights flicker, that was a recloser operating. You're like, oh, it flickered. That was a recloser testing the line saying, oh, something's on me. What is it? And then it'll reclose again. So it might flicker a second time, right? And it's like, oh man, is that limb still there? And then, potentially a third time, you might see it just shut off entirely. Your power is off for, 5, 10 minutes, maybe a couple hours. And that's where a situation may have occurred where we need a patrolman to patrol the line. It was a little bit more, something more is going on, and so we need a patrolman to see maybe there's a limb that entirely brought down a line, and that needs to be corrected, right? And so that's some of the scenarios that a recloser, you may experience with a recloser. So those are some of the things that we're doing to make the system, the equipment, the hardware, more resilient, right? There are also operational practices that can be done differently in the fire high consequence areas, as well as other areas, such as vegetation management, which I do want to mention we do have a representative from Vegetation Management Department here. So if you have some questions on that, we do have a subject matter expert in the audience. The vegetation management program does include air and ground surveillance of vegetation, so inspecting the lines, and then going through and providing clearance through tree pruning and other means. And in the FHCA, generally speaking, the clearance is going to be wider. And there's also different clearances that are, we're clearing to essentially based off of how fast the vegetation is that's going to grow, right? Faster growing trees get trimmed a little bit further back. Additionally, there's also the identification of something that could be called hazard trees. There's a couple of names for it, but basically it's your dead, dying, disease tree kind of scenario, something that is at risk of potentially falling on a line. That's identified for tree removal as well. Not pictured on this slide, but just something of note is pole clearing. So in the fire high consequence areas where you have equipment on a pole, the entire pole will be cleared around it. So should there be some sort of spark that comes off an equipment, anything like that, there's nothing on the ground for it to fall onto, right? Now, that's what we're doing about trees, right? But another source of ignition could be equipment. And so I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about our asset management program, and then followed up by some of the field operation practices that are different. So in the FHCA area or the fire high consequence areas, your inspections are going to be conducted more frequently. Conditions that have a potential for an energy release are going to be corrected more quickly as well. Basically, it's finding things quicker and fixing them faster that have potential for an energy release risk. Additionally, there are different field operation practices that can occur. So for example, should Chester in the meteorology team's forecasts indicate, man, it's really dry out and it's very windy, there are some options that we can do with our field operations practices to work differently. For example, we could not drive vehicles off-road, right? Vehicles can be a source of ignition. We don't want to do that. Additionally, we can also defer non-essential work. We do always want to keep the power on as much as we possibly can. However, if there's a little bit more elevated risk and it's non-essential work, it can be deferred if there's a wildfire risk. Now I'd like to talk to you about how we can operate the system differently, right? So first I talked about hardware and things we're doing on that side of things and how we're actually doing practices different. And then this video here is going to walk through the different operational practices or like software switching type scenarios that could occur.
At Pacific Power, we're committed to providing the safe, reliable service you count on every day. During conditions such as gusting winds and hot, dry weather, and in areas near trees and other types of vegetation that could ignite, we may need to take certain steps to reduce the potential risk and impact of wildfires. While these safety measures may interrupt your service, they are essential to preventing catastrophic wildfire events. Let's look at 3 of the ways we help protect communities during times of heightened wildfire risk. The first is enhanced safety settings. During times when wildfire risk is elevated, we will adjust the sensitivity of some of our equipment. With these settings activated, our lines will de-energize quicker, within fractions of a second, if a line is contacted by a tree branch or other debris, reducing the risk of a fire ignition. Because of this, there's an increased potential for power to be disrupted and remain off until field crews can visually inspect the lines to determine if power can be safely restored. Next up is the public safety power shutoff. Hotter, drier, and windier weather conditions can create heightened wildfire risk, and we may implement a public safety power shutoff, or PSPS, temporarily shutting off power to specific targeted areas. A PSPS is done in partnership with local emergency management teams, using available communication options to notify customers that power may be turned off, and to keep affected communities informed throughout an enacted shutoff. Once we've determined that the fire risk has passed, we will turn the power back on and restore service. Finally, our wildfire encroachment strategy is another wildfire safety tool that may result in a disruption of your power. When an active wildfire moves close enough to threaten burning into the area of our lines or equipment, we will begin monitoring the fire closely to evaluate its potential spread and impacts to our systems. If the fire is moving too close to our assets, we will do an emergency de-energization of our power lines. This process helps us make the most effective decisions to avoid additional fire risk and protect first responders. Here at Pacific Power, we're dedicated to keeping our customers safe while delivering the power that our communities count on each and every day. And during times of extreme weather events, when wildfire risk is at its highest, our wildfire safety strategies will help protect our customers and the communities that we serve. To learn more, visit us at pacificpower.net/wildfire.
Awesome. So, some of the tools that were talked about in here, like PSPS, the encroachment, where power could be shut off. I do want to emphasize that's really a tool of last resort. As a power company, we really want to keep the power on as much as we can. However, because of safety purposes, sometimes we just need to be safe when the risk is when there's wildfire risk. I do also want to note that before power is turned on, You know, they talked to it a little bit in here. Sometimes a patrol is needed, right? In the video, it was kind of nice because it's like this little limb, right? He goes up in his truck and he takes off the limb. However, sometimes it can be like a whole tree that just fell on the line. It was a perfectly healthy tree outside of the clearance, perfectly fine. It was just an exceptionally windy day and it fell on a line. And so you may see some sustained outages because of situations like that as well. And with that, you may be asking yourself, okay, PSPS, my power goes off, what can I do? And Nora's going to be speaking to that actually right now. So, and I'd like to turn it over to our emergency management director, Nora.
All right, thank you, Megan. Can you hear me okay? I have a very small voice. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you for coming here tonight, and thank you for caring about wildfire safety and listening to us talk about what we do. I'd like to talk about what you can expect, and then some options that you can take care of as well. You heard Chester talk about how we find out about a wildfire risk and our situational awareness, as we call it. And then you also heard Megan talk about our long-term strategy and things that we're doing to harden the system so that way we don't have to ultimately do these types of operational practices like PSPS or encroachment. But until then, we still have to rely on these tools, and I'll briefly explain to you really what to expect during a public safety power shutoff, why we do it, and how you'll be notified and what kind of things that we offer and coordinate on. So just to recap, 3 different conditions occur for a PSPS, and as you may remember from the video, it happens in the top 98%, only that top 2% of weather days. Given that we have 30 years of historical data, it's a very unlikely event. In fact, we've only done it once in Oregon. That was in September of 2022, not here. And that averaged about 21 hours of power outage for those individuals that we had to turn the power off on them. We hope to never do it again, but again, it's a tool that we have temporarily until we have long-term strategies implemented. So dry and dead vegetation, that fuel that Chester talked about, when we have conditions where the trees have dried out later in the summer, that's typically when it could happen. Specific wind conditions, so things like the windiest day on record, the hottest, driest temperatures, and then coupled that with your terrain. So your ground, is it flat with a lot of grass that could just spread really quickly? Is it a forest with mountains and terrain that could also spread very quickly? Those conditions are considered. And then potential impact. If it's not going to impact infrastructure or communities, then we don't do it. But those are the trifecta that we call it, that we consider. I'm going to talk to you about how we communicate with you during a PSPS event. It's not something that we do without notification. It's something that we plan in advance. We find out about PSPS about 5 days in advance for meteorology, so we know it's coming. We know to expect it because the conditions look extreme enough. They're in that top 2 percentile. So about 5 days out, we find out, we start narrowing down where potentially this would happen and figure out where the impacts would be. 3 days out, we start contacting our public safety partners. So that would be emergency management that we have in the room here. Public health, now we have a great new contact. And forest, fire departments, police, any critical infrastructure. So if you have hospitals and schools and so forth, we start making those contacts 3 days in advance. We do this for 2 reasons primarily. First, we want to find out what the critical facilities are and if they need support with power during the planned outage, the public safety power shutoff. And then second, do we need to stand up a community resource center? A community resource center is different from a shelter. It's not an overnight operation, but what it is, it's a place to go, get out of the conditions, get air conditioning, Wi-Fi, charge your phone, your devices, get information on the event, get snacks, drinks, water. And with the help of the local community and public safety partners, we determine if there's one needed and where that would need to go. We can stand one up in a tent in a parking lot. We can stand one up in a facility. It just like this one could potentially, serve in that case. So we work to determine that. And then we start contacting customers directly. So that's when you receive the first notification. We do that about 2 days in advance and let you know by phone, text, email. And that only goes to the customers that are impacted. We also do media releases and other types of social media and put it on our website as well. We do this again 24 hours before, and then we'll do it again 1 to 4 hours before we plan the event. Now, sometimes the weather doesn't turn out as bad, and sometimes it gets better, so we won't do the shut off, and then we'll let you know at some point in that time if we don't do it as well. Then we'll make one final notification. This is your 4th notification now that we are starting to turn the power off. And this gives you an opportunity if you need to go somewhere or if you need assistance with something, so that way you have a better idea of what to expect. Ultimately, when the event passes, and typically these are very short-term lived events, they don't last very long, we will let you know that the event has passed and we've been cleared to start re-energizing. Now that does take time because, as you saw, we have to patrol the lines. After these events, we have to fix anything that's damaged, any debris that's falling or anything that's broken. We can only do this during the daytime when it's visible. When we have visibility, we can't do it in overnight hours. And so we'll restore in those phases like that. And then we'll let you know finally when your power is back on. And that's for 2 reasons as well. That's if you had to leave home to get resources, then you know it's safe to return. And then also if your power is not back on, then you know to call us and let us know so we can troubleshoot. So these events, there's a lot of communication going on and for a lot of good reasons, but again, we hope never to use them, but in the event that we do, you have an idea of what to expect. So, as you can tell, we directly contact customers, so we really ask and let you know that it's really important to make sure your information is updated with us. So you can do this by calling our customer service line. You can log on to your account and make sure it's updated. I don't know how long ago you signed up for service. Power company is not something that I would think of to update my contact information, but we'd like to ask for the opportunity to just verify that it's current. Most people will get a recorded phone call, but customers that are part of our medical certificate program, these are customers that rely on electricity for their devices. They will get a personal phone call from customer service. That means they talk to them, make sure they understand what's going to happen, and they have resources available. That way, it's important for us to know also who are our customers that are medically vulnerable that rely on electricity, because we do have resources that we can't provide during a shutoff. So for those of you that are interested in QR codes, you're welcome to snap these too and get electronic copies. We also have paper copies on the back there as well. So please take a brochure. We ask that you have friends or family or neighbors, others that you know that rely on electricity. We ask that you have them register so that way we're aware of their situation and we can help them out. We also want to share that we have a battery backup rebate program. Excuse me, it's up to $4,000 on backup power generation for those customers. And the brochure and the QR code is located right here. This is not just for customers, but also for those that provide services to seniors and those with disabilities. So they're also eligible for the program. Excuse me. All right, now we're gonna go to what you can do. How many of you have an emergency plan in this room? Okay, that sounds about right. Very small amount. So emergency plan, it's free. There's templates online, and really it's so important to talk through with your family, your neighbors, those that rely on you, or those that you can help out, or those that maybe can help you. What do you expect if you were to have a disaster like an earthquake or a flood or a fire? Do you know where you're going to meet? Do you have your important contact information? Do you have your medications? Do you have medical records and those types of things? It's free again. It's a great peace of mind to have everybody have that information put together and be aware of like, okay, my kids are at school and my mom is at the senior home, but we know what to do if something happened and we couldn't contact each other. Now I'm going to ask how many of you have an emergency kit? It's about the same amount, okay. This one is a little bit more daunting, right? Because it requires a lot of things. You can do this in phases, though. You don't have to put it together all at once. You can add items to your grocery list every week, or you can do a section, during certain times of the year. But you can put together a kit. That way you can be sustained, whether it's a go kit where something you pick up and go because you can't be home for a couple of days, or whether it's something at home. If you're stuck at home, you don't have resources, you don't have power, you don't have access to water, groceries. Can you and your family sustain yourselves for a couple of weeks? Considerations for these, of course, are really important. Anybody with vulnerabilities in your family, do they need assistance with walking? Do they need medications? Your pets, do they have food, a leash, vaccination records? Do your kids have their favorite things so they can feel comfortable and not scared? We encourage all of you to take time and start preparing those kits. They don't have to be perfect, they don't have to be complete, but again, a great peace of mind. Now I'm going to ask, how many of you have land and how many have created defensible space in your... Thank you, thank you. Oh, that's more than the people that have kits or plans. That's great. I love it. Okay, well, again, this is a great way to help with making your home safe from wildfire as well, creating a defensible space. We have information on this available as well. There's basically 3 different zones and how you take care of your vegetation around your home. Another thing in the community that you can do, if you live in an apartment or if you're not around, you see something like this, please report it. This type of hazard may be innocuous during a sunny day with little wind or even a rainy day, but you get a snow or ice storm or you get a windy day, and this quickly becomes a hazard. So we encourage you to look around your community and report anything that you see, that debris or downed trees. This is the same as the outage line, so you can report that on this line as well. So finally, in closing, I'll end it here. Just a couple things to take away that I'd like to ask for you. Update your contact information, because we do make direct contact with you when there's outages. You can do this again by calling customer service or online on your account. Make sure that you have information for your those that rely on medical for their vulnerabilities or medical equipment that rely on electricity. If you can encourage them to sign up for our medical certificate program, so that way we know that they may need additional assistance if there's a power outage. And then if you qualify, or if you know somebody that qualifies, please apply for a backup power rebate. It's up to $4,000. It's a great deal, and it's a great piece of your emergency kit. And with that, I'll stop it there and hand it back to Simon.